You think the enemy was the worst thing a Roman legionary faced? Think again. The Germans beyond the Rhine? Terrifying, sure. The Parthian horse archers? Absolute nightmares. But nothing, and I mean nothing, kept a Roman soldier awake at night quite like the man standing right behind him. His own commander. Because here's the brutal truth that most people don't understand about Rome's legendary military machine. The empire wasn't built on courage, it wasn't built on patriotism, it was built on fear. Pure, gut-wrenching, soul-crushing fear. And that fear didn't come from barbarians screaming on the other side of the battlefield. It came from the Roman officer class itself. Let me paint you a picture. You're a fresh recruit, 18 years old. You've just signed away the next 25 years of your life to the legions. You think you're scared of combat. You haven't even begun to understand what fear is, because from the moment you step into that training camp, you learn one lesson that will define your entire existence as a soldier. Your commander owns you, body and soul, life and death, everything. The centurion, your immediate superior, carried a vine stick called a vitis. Sounds innocent enough, right? A little wooden stick. But that piece of wood became the single most feared object in your daily life. Centurions beat soldiers for everything. Marching too slow? Beaten. Equipment not polished? Beaten. Looking at the centurion wrong? You guessed it. Beaten. And these weren't gentle corrections. Roman writers tell us about centurions who broke their vine sticks over soldiers' backs. So often they earned nicknames for it. One centurion was literally called Cedo Alteram, give me another, because he kept snapping his sticks on legionaries' spines and demanding replacements. Imagine that. Your superior officer beats you so frequently and so violently that breaking his weapon on your body becomes his defining characteristic, his calling card. And you stand there and take it. You say nothing, because complaining means something far, far worse. Now here's where it gets truly horrifying. Let's say you mess up. Not a small mistake, a real failure. You fall asleep on guard duty. You run from battle. You lose your weapons. What happens to you makes a beating look like a gentle massage. They called it fustuarium, and it was exactly as terrible as it sounds. Your fellow soldiers, your brothers, the men you eat with, sleep next to, bleed beside. They form two lines. You're stripped of your armor, your weapons, your dignity. And then you're forced to walk between those lines while every single one of them beats you with clubs and stones. They don't stop until you're dead. And if you somehow manage to survive, if you crawl out the other end still breathing, you're cast out of the camp, forbidden from returning to Rome, forbidden from seeing your family. You become a ghost, a nothing, the walking dead. But wait, it gets worse. Because fustuarium was for individual failures. What happened when an entire unit disgraced itself? What happened when a whole cohort showed cowardice in battle? Decimation. This is the punishment that should make your blood run cold. The commander would line up the disgraced unit, every man. Then they'd draw lots. Random chance. Pure luck. And 1 out of every 10 soldiers would be selected. Not because they were guilty, not because they'd done anything wrong personally, just because the number came up. Those selected men were then beaten to death by the other 9, their own tent mates, their friends. Men they'd shared bread with that very morning would cave in their skulls before sunset. And here's the psychological genius of Roman brutality. The survivors had to do the killing. They had to live with it. They had to wake up every day knowing they'd murdered their brothers because a commander told them to. And they'd do it again if ordered, without hesitation. If you're finding this fascinating, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps us bring more content like this to you. Subscribe if you haven't already. Now you might be thinking, surely this was rare. Surely decimation was an extreme measure used once in a blue moon. And you'd be right, it wasn't common. But that's precisely what made it so effective. Every Roman soldier knew it could happen. Every single one. The threat hung over their heads like a sword, and commanders absolutely used it when they felt the need. Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the richest men in Roman history, ordered decimation of his troops during the Spartacus rebellion. Hundreds of Roman soldiers beaten to death by their own comrades because Crassus decided they'd shown insufficient aggression against a slave army. Can you imagine? Surviving combat against gladiators and rebel slaves, only to be randomly selected and clubbed to death by your best friend because some wealthy politician wanted to make a point. And Crassus wasn't special. He wasn't some uniquely cruel monster. He was operating within the system, a system designed from the ground up to make Roman soldiers more afraid of their commanders than any enemy they'd ever face. Think about what that does to a man's mind. Every morning you wake up and your primary concern isn't the Gauls massing on the frontier. It isn't the Numidian cavalry waiting in ambush. It's whether your centurion is in a bad mood. It's whether you polished your helmet well enough. It's whether your tent mate might report you for some minor infraction. The Roman military created a surveillance state 2,000 years before the term existed. Soldiers watched each other, reported each other, because the punishments for failing to report someone else's violation were almost as severe as the original crime. You became complicit just by keeping your mouth shut. Trust no one. Fear everyone. Sleep with one eye open, figuratively and literally, because falling asleep on watch meant death. And the commanders, they cultivated this fear deliberately. Roman military manuals actually discussed the importance of soldiers fearing their officers. It wasn't a bug in the system, it was the entire point. A famous Roman saying went something like this: the soldier should fear his commander more than the enemy, because the enemy might kill him, but the commander definitely will. Let that sink in. Might versus definitely. Now picture yourself in formation. Battle approaching. Thousands of screaming barbarians rushing toward you with murder in their eyes. Your legs want to run. Every instinct screams at you to flee, but you don't. You can't. Because behind you stands your centurion with that vine stick. Behind him stands the military tribune who can order your decimation. Behind him stands the legate who can have your entire unit executed for cowardice. Running from the enemy means possible death. Standing your ground means possible survival. But running from your position means certain death, and not the quick death of a barbarian sword. The slow, agonizing death of your own brothers beating you with rocks. So you stand, you hold the line, not because you're brave, not because you love Rome, but because the man behind you terrifies you more than anything in front of you. This was the genius of Roman military discipline. They took ordinary men, farmers, craftsmen, merchants' sons, and transformed them into the most effective fighting force the ancient world had ever seen. Not through inspiration, not through loyalty, through terror. The legions conquered the known world because Roman soldiers were more afraid of their commanders than any enemy could ever make them. The empire was built on the broken backs of men who learned that the most dangerous man on any battlefield was the one wearing Roman armor and standing behind you. Some modern historians try to soften this. They talk about esprit de corps and unit cohesion and shared Roman identity, and sure, some of that existed. But underneath it all, fear. Raw, primal, ever-present fear. The fear that made men do impossible things. March 20 miles in full armor, dig fortifications after 12 hours of combat, charge into certain death without hesitation. Because hesitation meant something worse than death. It meant disappointing the commander. And that was the one thing no Roman soldier could ever afford to do. So the next time someone tells you about Roman courage or Roman discipline or Roman military excellence, remember what that really meant. Remember the vine stick breaking over backs. Remember the lots being drawn for decimation. Remember men beating their friends to death because an officer gave the order. That's the legacy of Rome's military machine, built not on glory, but on fear. If you learned something today, make sure to like and subscribe. We've got plenty more stories about what it really meant to serve in Rome's legions. Trust me, It only gets more brutal from here.